Let's get our third deep dive session started for today. And I'm thankful to be joined by expert panelists today. Craig Connors, Chief Technology Officer of SD-WAN and SASE at VMware, and Mark Cohn, Principal Technology Strategist, Virtualization, Spirent. Thank you both so much for sharing your time and your talents with us today. Looking forward to having a good time. You okay?
Yeah, great.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Jim.
Oh, good. Craig, let's jump straight into this and help me understand what are the trends that are shaping the security landscape today?
Yeah, thanks, John. I think there's a couple important trends that are shaping the security landscape and really leading us down this path towards the Secure Access Service Edge, or SASE. The first is that, classically, when we deployed security techniques, they were deployed in the perimeter, at the branch, in a firewall, signature-based security mechanisms deployed in ASICs. And we were able to categorize threats and then react to those threats when they were seen. And now in the modern world, we have a couple of different challenges to that. One is that the perimeter is dissolving. People are moving all over the place. The second is that threats are evolving. And so we have advanced security techniques like remote browser isolation, like sandboxing, like network threat analytics that really require cloud scale computing to deliver effectively. And so what SASE allows us to do is deliver some of those advanced threat techniques in the cloud, but in a way where they're close enough to users that they don't add a significant amount of latency. And as Mark and I were talking about, users are shifting from inside the office to outside the office. So that notion of the perimeter dissolving and work from anywhere is becoming more and more important, especially in light of the pandemic.
And I would echo what Craig was saying, because Spirent, like many other companies, are in a situation where we're not even sure when we would come back to the office. And even after the pandemic, when everything settles out, we've seen some survey data that indicates that up to a third of employees that were in an office before COVID-19 are planning to stay at home and likely to be working from anywhere. So we need to have a architecture that is going to address this changing environment driven by the cloud.
It's a great add-on, Mark, and I appreciate you sharing all that. And Craig, as you mentioned, also it's that elevated exposure to people can continue to be working at home and where that's going to take us. So I love how we kind of build that as the basis. So we'll continue on that thought, Craig. If you could just define SASE and why it's eliciting so much attention today.
Right. I think it was already exciting before this work from anywhere shift. It's extra exciting now.
It is.
There's a couple different things that we always talk about in security. One is that when we give keynotes at VMware, we like to throw up this slide of all the security vendors in the industry, and there's like 1,000 logos on there, right? And that itself is a security risk, because if I'm in the SOC and I've got to manage a different firewall vendor and a different CWS vendor and a different zero trust vendor, and all of my different piece parts of security are coming from all these different places, it becomes a full-time job just to normalize what's going on in order to deliver that consistent security policy for everyone. So as apps modernize and they move from the data center to the cloud, as users move from the branch to anywhere, we want a way of simplifying our security stack, centralizing things as much as we can, and simply delivering that consistent policy to users so that we don't have such an enormous task in the SOC of trying to manage this for our security business.
How would you like to add on to that, Mark?
Well, SASE, in essence, provides a distributed architecture where we're moving functionality that was traditionally deployed within the customer environment, the CPE, and moving that to the edge. And the edge is one of the most exciting areas of the cloud. And as Craig was implying, this is going to be a new frontier where we're going to see a lot of different possibilities as SASE unfolds.
Sure. And how about, if you would, could you walk us through the SASE architecture?
Yeah, so let me walk you through, our architecture. And of course, I brought a slide to show what the VMware SASE architecture looks like. But I think at a high level, you'll see the same core components coming through no matter which vendor you talk to. On our diagram, on the left side, we have the access technologies, and on the right side, we have the security technologies. When it comes to access, there's the SD-WAN, obviously near and dear to my heart as the CTO of SD-WAN. That's where your branch offices, your retail stores, your distribution centers are accessing what we call SASE POPs, those cloud points of presence that are geographically distributed to allow users to access those security services in a low latency way. And then you have some form of zero trust or secure access so that users who aren't sitting in the branch can access from anywhere those same SASE POPs. And going back to that consistency model we talked about earlier, get access to those same set of security services. On the right, when you talk about security, there's really two different core types that we look at VMware. First is cloud web security. So we're delivering this through a partnership with Menlo Security. This is securing my web and SaaS applications, things like CASB, anti-malware, URL filtering, remote browser isolation for securing those internet applications. And then you have next-gen firewalling, where you want to be able to secure the things that are happening in your data center, in your IaaS. So again, anti-malware, URL filtering, some of the same techniques, but you've also got IDS, IPS, and network threat analytics playing a big role. And I'm sure, Mark, being at Spirent and talking to lots of different vendors, you've seen a little bit different twist on this diagram, but I bet they all look kind of the same as ours does.
Yeah, and I would tend to agree with Craig that the architecture is an architecture. It's not an implementation. So we're going to see a number of variants that are going to be based on the same model, which is to distribute the cloud security functions in the cloud. And because of the complexity of this environment, because of the number of vendors that we're talking about, one vendor per security function and other providers of various security and infrastructure components, this is a very complex environment. And because of especially the multi-vendor aspect to this of SASE, this is one of the main motivations why the MEF stepped in, leveraging the momentum of the SD-WAN project to consider the industry's first attempt to standardize the SASE architecture. And not only do we need to standardize a service, but we also have to rethink and examine the role of testing in that service, because we're going to need to validate and assure the various different functions as well as the end-to-end service, and not to mention the existing infrastructure that the whole environment is built upon.
Yeah, and if I could just add to Mark's point a little bit there, he mentioned multi-vendor, and I think that's really key. When SASE was conceived of, I guess, the idea was it was going to be a single vendor, single pane of glass solution. And I think, the network security folks that are listening to this are probably thinking, well, that sounds ideal, but that's probably not realistic, right? And so you want to simplify things as much as you can. You want to provide a common cloud platform where you can interconnect these different security vendors. But I think for most of us, the reality is we're not all going to go to a single vendor tomorrow. And so as we chart that evolution, maybe from multi-vendor to single vendor, or as we live in perpetuity in this multi-vendor world, to Mark's point, how do I certify this? That's where MEF standards and techniques from Spirent become really, really important, because now it's not just trusting that the vendor's delivering what they said. I've got to take two solutions and make sure that they're interoperating in a standard, reliable, secure way.
No, it's so true. So you're saying that single pane of glass, that's a dream. We can hope, right? We can still have hope for that? Come on, Craig.
Hey, we're going to deliver it at VMware. So if everyone wants to go pure VMware, single pane of glass, we've got the solution for you.
All right.
But we know that's not true for everyone, so we'll accommodate both approaches.
Well, then talk me through, what would you say are some of the best use cases that your customers are looking for?
Yeah, so, I'll give a couple different examples. And the first one is a financial services customer that we have, large across the United States. And one of the challenges that they faced is that they've shifted their work model as a result of the pandemic. And it's not not a temporary thing. They've made a permanent shift where they're going to reduce their retail footprint. And instead of having folks sitting in the office 5 days a week, they're going to rotate them through the office. So folks will work from home some days and they'll work from the office some days. And that will allow them to reduce their spend on capital expenditure and things like that. And so as a result, they still want to be able to deliver that consistent security approach that we talked about earlier. One technique that a lot of big companies do when it comes to securing the devices and applications is using remote desktop technology, right? And so this company is using VMware's remote desktop technology. The PCs live in the office. The users, whether they're working from home or they're working in the office, they're accessing the same PC. It's just a matter of whether I'm actually sitting at the mouse and keyboard or I'm sitting at home and remote desktoping into that same device that's sitting in my office. And using their legacy approach, what they had to do in order to access those machines is to connect via their traditional VPN. So they have a big VPN head end in St. Louis. They connect back to St. Louis and back to the office. Well, that means for me, so I'm in San Jose, California. And if I need to access my PC that's sitting in San Jose, California, I'm actually VPNing to St. Louis, back to San Jose, and then I'm adding all of this latency, and it's really degrading my experience just to achieve that secure environment. With SASE, we've got these points of presence that are distributed around the United States. And so those users now, instead of going back to St. Louis, they're connecting no matter where they are to the closest SASE POP. In the example I gave, it happens to be in San Jose. So now I connect to a POP in San Jose. I'm authenticated using Zero Trust. I hop on the network and go directly to the San Jose office. And so I've cut my latency down from an order of magnitude in order to access that use case. And I think you'll find similar use cases like that in the remote work shift environment. The other big use case that we've seen at VMware is folks that are hosting their cloud security services on-prem are finding that, I talked about in the beginning, some of these advanced security techniques that require cloud scale computing. Well, when you start deploying them yourself, you realize it's not as easy as deploying firewalls used to be. Now I've got to manage this elastic set of racks of 50 compute servers to do remote browser isolation. And that's a big burden that I would like to offload onto a managed service. And so, one user benefit, this low latency access, the SOC benefit, the consistency, and now you have the network management benefit of simplifying the deployment in the lab. That makes it better for basically everyone in the network, which is kind of what we really want in any solution, right? And I'm sure, Mark, you've seen similar benefits like this in talking to Spirent customers about why they're making the move to SASE and what they're hoping to achieve.
Craig, we have, and the architecture is very exciting to many customers because of the nature of the workforce today. We talked about the trend toward a work from home or work from anywhere, just paradigm shift that's very dramatic, that it was already underway prior to the pandemic, but was certainly accelerated. And I don't think we're going to go back, as we discussed before, but that actually introduces some major challenges to managing this environment that we didn't have before. Think of the attack surface, which went from a physical perimeter to now we have in almost a greater number of home networks that don't have enterprise class security protection. And we need to rethink how the home network environment fits into the broader enterprise environment when it comes to the number one priority for many CIOs. I just saw some data from a very large survey, which is security again, where over 40% of those CIOs are increasing their security spend as they look at 2021, especially on the tail end of major security breaches in the past 2 years. And one of the things that we have to think about is that when we're talking about a home user in particular, because these were the use cases that, or at least part of the use cases that Craig was mentioning, the home user is largely on their own. So the ability to minimize downtime and to be able to provide this notion of multi-layer troubleshooting is even more critical in this environment. We don't have an IT organization that you can wander down to the next office over. We can't just pick up another computer. These are home users that have a very limited environment, and SASE is going to revolutionize how we're going to be able to address this new class of user that's going to be here for over the long term.
Yeah, I think, a lot of people are probably thinking, well, didn't we already shift to remote work? Like, isn't this a solved problem? And I think really what happened is, and I'll say, like, VMware IT, these guys are heroes, because on Friday they said, hey, 30,000 people don't come to the office on Monday, and hey, IT staff, make sure you're ready for that. And so what we had was literally heroics from these network teams all over the world at all these big companies, making sure that people could just keep doing their jobs. And now, we've got time to take a breath and say, as Mark said, this is the new normal going forward. Okay, well, let's figure out how we would do this right. And how can we fix and robustify, I guess, if I can make that word up, some of the things we bandaged together to make this work really quickly overnight? And how can we make this secure and reliable for the long term so that we really can make this the new normal and make it a solution that the SOC and the NOC and everybody's comfortable supporting for the long term?
That's good. Thank you, Craig. Robustify. I'm actually going to write that down in case I have to get like a Pictionary or something. I have to define that or use that in a sentence. Trademark that. That's a good word. And you're right. I think there's a lot of heroes literally watching this in terms of what they've done, how heroic it truly is to making everyone accessible and usable from their home base. Mark, dig in for me a little bit. And how about the assessment of how SASE is going to unfold, and even address what are some of the accelerators and maybe even what's going to limit the adoption?
Well, like many networking technologies, SASE is going to unfold based on a hybrid model. We've had the chance to talk to not only some of our traditional customers, which are technology providers as well as managed service providers and even security companies, but we've also talked to some enterprise end users as well, which we traditionally haven't served as much as the other segments. And what they have indicated is that they don't want to necessarily see a monolithic solution provided by a single vendor. What they're going to do is integrate elements that they already have in place that are already deployed in existing data centers or even on dedicated servers, and be able to bring on board cloud security functions as the edge gains momentum within these enterprise environments. And the hybrid environment just adds complexity in terms of management and in terms of validation of an assurance of how these end-to-end services are going to be delivered. I mean, if we had a streamlined single vendor solution, it would be relatively straightforward. We would work with that vendor, we would integrate with that network management system, and not only that, security management systems, whether it's a CM platform or whatever it might be. But in this environment, we have to be even extra vigilant to be able to think about how we're going to address disparate environments and multiple vendors' security functions, not to mention the infrastructure functions, which adds a degree of complexity. And that's going to necessitate that we think through a multi-layer testing strategy that builds upon the traditional network testing, but expands into a very different set of security testing procedures, facilities, and even tools. And security testing is much less structured. It is more ad hoc. It needs to be programmable to address an ever-changing set of threats in the environment. And SASE lends itself to to restore some order by removing functions that may have been deployed at the end user and the data center and now are going to be deployed in the cloud, and provides that opportunity to centralize these functions as we migrate to a more cloud native environment. It's not going to start there, but it's certainly going to end up there. And the MEF is going to play a role here as well. We had established the MEF Security Test and Certification Group, which is examining how we can test, how we can validate, and assure these new security services, especially not just SASE, but other MEF initiatives like the Application Security for SD-WAN program as well. So what we are going to see is an environment that individual users are going to dictate how their journey unfolds. And what we need to be able to do, whether you're a SASE provider like VMware or a network provider or a provider of test and assurance solutions like Spirent, we need to be able to adapt into that very, that pseudo customized environment to be able to address their, each individual needs.
Excellent. Anything you'd like to wrap up with, Craig?
Yeah, I would just like to add, in terms of adoption, it's pretty exciting that we talk about the sort of classic crossing the chasm model and innovators leading the way. And that's not what we see in SASE. I mean, I mentioned that large financial services customer that's using us for our SASE solution. Those are not usually the first movers. And so you can see how much excitement there is about this technology when companies that are usually very hesitant to adopt these techniques are adopting them to accommodate this new type of work environment. I think when it comes to challenges, just to build on Mark's point, we're bringing together a lot of different things: zero trust, SD-WAN, firewall, and cloud web security, deploying points of presence in the cloud. And if you look at the vendors that are getting in the SASE space, most of them aren't experts in all of those areas. And so the impetus is on us as vendors. At VMware, even though we have Workspace ONE Zero Trust, even though we have NSX, distributed firewall, and some of these security techniques, I think classically we're not thought of as a security company. And I think for some security companies, they're not classically thought of as cloud companies delivering cloud points of presence. And so the onus is on us to convince the users that we're the right solution to entrust their network to. And that's where folks like MEF and Spirent will help us in building that trust with the user base so that they feel comfortable making the move. Because like I said, the need is obviously there as seen by those early adopters.
Thank you so much, Craig. And you're right, you do bring customers together, just like this whole entire MEF Infinite Edge series has brought so many people together. And thank you so much for sharing your time and your talents, yourself as well, Mark. So everyone out there watching, put your hands together. Cheers, high fives, one more time for Craig Connors, Chief Technology Officer of SD-WAN and SASE for VMware, and Mark Cohn, Principal Technology Strategist, Virtualization for Spirent. Thank you so much for joining us. And folks, what a great day it has been, and a perfect way to wrap up episode 2 of the MEF Infinite Edge series. Here to wrap things up officially is your host, John.